The expense report was just 3 pages long. Sarah Chen submitted it on a Tuesday morning. It was for a client lunch in Denver. The total was $147. Her new manager, David Ross, rejected it by noon. He cited a new policy about pre-approval. Sarah had the emailed approval from the previous manager. David said those were obsolete now. He told her to absorb the cost personally. It was a quiet, bureaucratic slap. She was a senior logistics planner. He was the new VP of operations. He had joined the company 6 weeks prior. David Ross loved visibility. He restructured teams for efficiency. His presentations were full of bold fonts. Sarah's team of 5 was dissolved. Her expertise was now redundant. He assigned her to manual data audits. It was work for interns. Sarah did not complain. She filed the rejected report in a personal folder. She noted the date and the policy number David quoted. The policy had been updated that very morning. She began her data audit task without comment. The system access felt slower than usual. Her usual login failed twice. She requested the necessary permissions through the portal. David denied the request. He said she should use the shared read-only login. This was against security protocol. She knew this. She used the shared login anyway. It could only view records, not export them. Her task required exporting for analysis. She emailed David about the limitation. He did not reply for 2 days. Then he sent a calendar invite. It was for a one-on-one performance check. The meeting was set for Friday at 5 p.m. She accepted the invite. On Thursday, she reviewed her employment contract. It was a digital file from 8 years ago. She also opened the company's corporate bylaws. These were buried in the legal intranet. Few employees knew they were there. She read a specific clause about duty assignment. It had to be commensurate with title and compensation. She made no notes. She simply closed the documents. Friday's meeting was brief. David was on a video call with someone else. He muted himself to speak to her. He said her attitude was concerning. He mentioned the expense report friction. He cited her slow progress on the audit. He said she needed to be a team player. Sarah listened calmly. She asked for clarification on her core duties. David said her duties were whatever he assigned. He said flexibility was key. She nodded. She left the meeting at 5:15. That weekend, she accessed a secure cloud drive. It was unrelated to the company's server. She had maintained it for years. It contained project archives from her early days. One folder was named Asset Transfers 2016. Inside were scanned documents. They were not digital files. They were photographs of signed paper. The company had digitized all records the following year, but the original scans were low quality. Some signatures were cut off. Some pages were missing. The official digital copies were perfect, of course. Sarah's personal scans were the originals. She compared one page to the current corporate registry. A small discrepancy existed in the legal description. It involved a warehouse property. The company believed it owned the land outright. The document suggested a long-term lease with a purchase option. The option had expired unnoticed. No one had ever exercised it. Sarah closed the folder. She did nothing with the information. It was merely a fact. On Monday, David sent a department-wide email. It announced a new productivity tracking software. Everyone's activities would be measured. He congratulated the team on embracing change. Sarah's login was finally updated. She could now export data. She began the audit. The data was a mess of inconsistent entries. It would take weeks to clean manually. She wrote a simple script to automate the formatting. It took her 3 hours. She ran it on a small sample. It worked perfectly. She did not share the script. She performed the work manually at her desk. The tracking software showed steady activity. Meanwhile, David prepared for his first big initiative. He planned to consolidate West Coast logistics. He would close a small warehouse in Portland. He would shift its functions to a larger facility in Reno. The board expected significant cost savings. His presentation was slick. It promised a 20% reduction in regional costs. The board approved the plan in principle. They asked for a full due diligence report. David assigned the report to Sarah. He gave her a 7-day deadline. The request came via email with no prior discussion. It was a complex analysis. It normally required a team and 2 weeks. She replied asking for the historical capacity reports. David told her to pull them from the system. She knew those reports did not exist digitally. They were old, paper-based throughput studies. The originals were in storage. She submitted a request to Records for the boxes. Records denied the request. They said David's department had not approved the archival retrieval fees. She forwarded the denial to David. He told her to work with what was available. He said to make reasonable assumptions. Sarah spent an evening in the corporate library. It was a room no one visited. She found bound annual reports from 15 years ago. In the appendix of one, she found a summary table. It showed the Portland facility's peak efficiency metrics. The numbers were far higher than the current system showed. The Reno facility could not match them without major upgrades. Those upgrades were not in David's cost model. She scanned the page quietly. She included the data in her due diligence report. She presented it neutrally. She simply listed the historical capacity versus the projected Reno capacity. She highlighted no conflict. She submitted the report on day 7. David reviewed it that night. He removed the historical data page. He called it irrelevant legacy information. He sent the sanitized report to the board. They signed off on the warehouse closure. The legal team was instructed to review the Portland property lease for termination terms. A week later, the legal team sent a routine inquiry to David. They asked for the property's ownership deed. They needed it to understand termination penalties. David forwarded the request to Sarah. She was now the de facto repository for all Portland data. She replied to David and copied the legal lead. She stated that the deed was not in the digital repository. She suggested contacting the county recorder's office. Legal did so. They obtained a copy of the deed. It referenced a master lease agreement. The lease number was unfamiliar. The legal lead asked David for the master lease. David again asked Sarah. Sarah submitted another records retrieval request. This time, David approved the fees. 2 boxes arrived at her desk. She spent a day sorting through them. She found the master lease. It was a thick document from 1998. She photocopied the signature page and the key terms. She sent these to legal. The lease was for 99 years. It contained a purchase option. The option had expired 5 years prior. The company had missed the deadline. They now did not own the land. They were simply a tenant with 30 years remaining on the lease, a tenant responsible for all property taxes and maintenance. The landlord was a family trust. The contact information was outdated. Legal was unsettled. David was annoyed. He told legal it was their problem to solve. He had a closure timeline to meet. His bonus was tied to the projected savings. The savings required vacating the property. He could not vacate a lease he no longer controlled. He instructed legal to find the landlord and negotiate a buyout. Legal began the search. It was slow. Trust records were not easy to locate. David grew impatient. He decided to proceed with the operational closure. He would move the inventory to Reno. He would leave the Portland building empty. He assumed the landlord would eventually appear. Then the company could deal with it. Sarah monitored the situation through calendar invites. She was included on the closure project meetings. She saw the moving schedules. She saw the budget for terminating utilities. She said nothing. One afternoon, she received a calendar alert. It was for a mandatory training. The training was on corporate ethics and whistleblowing procedures. She attended the online session. It outlined the official channel for reporting concerns. It emphasized anonymity and non-retaliation. After the training, she reviewed the whistleblower policy document. It was 17 pages long. She focused on Section 4. It described protections for the reporter. It also described the investigation process. The process was managed by the audit committee of the board. It bypassed all management, including the CEO. She logged out of the system. That evening, she composed a plain text email. It was to the anonymous whistleblower intake address. The subject line was potential asset misstatement and regulatory risk. She did not mention David Ross. She stated that a corporate property, the Portland warehouse, was carried on the books as an owned asset. She stated that, per the attached lease documents, it was a leased asset. The difference had material impact on balance sheet valuations. She attached the scanned signature page of the lease. She also attached the county deed showing the lease reference. She included a one-line note. The note said the due diligence report for the closure omitted this data. She did not say who omitted it. She sent the email. The system sent an automatic confirmation code. She deleted the email from her sent folder. The next morning, David called an urgent meeting. Legal had found the landlord. The landlord was not interested in a buyout. The lease terms were favorable to them. They wanted the rent paid on time, or they would sue for the entire remaining lease value. David was furious. He asked legal for options. Legal said they had few. They could try to assign the lease to another tenant, but the lease required landlord approval. David's closure plan was now in jeopardy. His cost savings relied on eliminating the Portland lease payments, but the payments were legally obligated. He could not eliminate them. He had promised the board pure savings. This was a problem. He told legal to stall the landlord. He said he would revise the financial model. He left the meeting looking strained. Sarah returned to her desk. An hour later, her phone rang. The caller ID showed private number. She answered. A calm male voice introduced himself. He was from the internal audit department. He asked if she had a moment for a confidential discussion. She said she did. He asked her to meet him in the third-floor conference room, the one not booked in the system. She went there. A man and a woman in business attire were waiting. They showed her badges from the internal audit office. They thanked her for her email. They asked her to explain, in her own words, what happened with the Portland asset. She spoke factually. She described pulling the lease for the legal team. She described seeing the ownership classification in the fixed asset ledger. She mentioned the historical capacity data she had found. She said she included it in her initial due diligence report. She said she did not know what happened to that data after submission. The auditors took notes. They did not react. They asked for her report file. She said it was submitted through the portal. They could retrieve it. They asked if anyone had instructed her to alter data. She said no. They asked if she felt pressured to omit information. She paused. She said she was given a directive to work with available data. She said some data was deemed irrelevant. The auditors nodded. They told her the conversation was protected. They advised her not to discuss it with anyone. She agreed. She returned to her desk. David was waiting for her. He asked where she had been. She said she had been in the restroom. He seemed distracted. He did not press further. He said he needed a new analysis. He wanted to show that the Reno efficiencies would offset the ongoing Portland lease cost. He needed it by end of day. Sarah said she would need the upgraded capacity cost models. David said to use the numbers from his original board presentation. Those numbers did not include the capital for upgrades. She knew this. She created the analysis. She used his numbers. She produced a one-page document. It showed that, using the provided inputs, the savings would indeed offset the lease. She highlighted no caveats. She sent it to David. He forwarded it to the CFO with a confident message. He said the project was still viable. The CFO replied an hour later. He asked for a meeting with David first thing tomorrow. The request was marked high importance. David's calendar showed the meeting at 8 a.m. Sarah left at 5. The next morning, David was not at his desk by 10. The department was quiet. At 11, an all-hands meeting was called by the CFO. The CFO appeared on a video feed. He looked serious. He announced that the Portland closure project was paused. He cited newly discovered information about the property's legal status. He said internal audit would be reviewing the due diligence process. He urged everyone to cooperate fully. He said business continuity was key. Then he ended the call. David returned to his desk after lunch. He looked pale. He closed his office door. He did not emerge for the rest of the day. The following week, an email from HR arrived in every employee's inbox. It announced a mandatory training refresh on financial reporting integrity. It also included a link to an updated policy on management overrides of controls. David's schedule began to fill with meetings. Their titles were vague. Control Environment Review, Q2 Project Governance. He canceled all his regular team meetings. Sarah continued her data audit work. Her access permissions were suddenly restored to full level. She could now export, analyze, and run scripts. She quietly automated her entire backlog of work. She completed 3 weeks of tasks in 2 days. The tracking software showed phenomenal productivity. She received an automated system commendation. David had to approve it. He clicked approve without comment. A few days later, Sarah was copied on an email from the facilities department. They were conducting a physical asset verification at the Portland site. They asked for a list of capital equipment stored there. Sarah was copied because she was the logistics planner. David was not copied. She provided the list. She noted that several high-value items were listed. They were forklifts and automated sorting systems. The facilities team thanked her. A week later, they emailed again. They could not locate 2 of the forklifts. The serial numbers on the list did not match any equipment on site. David was finally copied on this email. He replied immediately. He said the list must be outdated. He told them to use the most recent inventory report. The facilities manager replied firmly. He said they were using the report Sarah provided. It was generated from the fixed asset system that morning. The system showed the forklifts should be in Portland. They were not. David said they were probably transferred to Reno early. He told them to check Reno. The facilities manager said they already had. The forklifts were not in Reno either. $200,000 of equipment was missing. David wrote a terse final reply. He said he would look into it personally. He did not email Sarah. He came to her desk. He asked her to pull all transfer orders for Portland in the last 6 months. She did. There were none for the missing equipment. The last transfer order was signed by David Ross. It was for some office furniture. Sarah printed the report for him. He took it without a word. His hand trembled slightly. That afternoon, a new calendar invite appeared. It was from the head of internal audit. The meeting was titled Portland Asset Reconciliation. The required attendees were David Ross, the CFO, and the head of logistics. The optional attendees included Sarah Chen. She was the only optional attendee. The meeting was set for 2 days later. Sarah accepted the calendar invite. The meeting was scheduled for a boardroom she had never entered. It was on the executive floor. The day before the meeting, an envelope arrived at her desk by internal mail. It contained a non-disclosure agreement. It was specific to the upcoming meeting. She was to sign it and return it to the audit department. She read the document carefully. It was standard. It prohibited discussion of the meeting's content. She signed it and sent it back. The next morning, she dressed as usual. She took the elevator to the 10th floor. The receptionist directed her to the boardroom. She arrived 5 minutes early. David was already there. He sat at the far end of the long table. He did not look at her. The head of internal audit entered. He introduced himself as Mark. The CFO came in last. He carried a thin file. The meeting began without preamble. Mark stated the purpose. It was to establish a timeline of the Portland asset classification. He turned to Sarah first. He asked when she first became aware of the lease document. She gave the date of her retrieval request. He asked if she had any prior knowledge of the lease terms. She said she did not. He asked if she had communicated her findings to anyone besides legal and audit. She listed David and the legal lead. He nodded. Then he turned to David. He asked when David first became aware of the lease. David said it was when legal brought it to his attention. Mark placed a printed email on the table. It was from David to the legal lead. The timestamp was from before Sarah's retrieval request. In it, David asked legal to clarify the ownership position on Portland quickly and quietly. Mark asked David to explain the email. David shifted in his seat. He said he had a general concern about property titles. He wanted a routine check. Mark did not challenge him. He moved on. He asked about the due diligence report. He had both versions, the one Sarah submitted and the one David sent to the board. He asked David why the historical capacity data was removed. David said the data was too old to be relevant. He said using it would mislead the board with outdated metrics. The CFO spoke for the first time. His voice was flat. He asked David if he had consulted any engineering leads on the data's relevance. David admitted he had not. The CFO made a note. Mark then addressed the missing forklifts. He asked David for his theory. David repeated his belief they were misplaced during the move planning. Mark presented a logistics report. It showed the forklifts were last scanned in Portland 18 months ago. The scan was for routine maintenance. After that, there was no digital footprint, no transfer orders, no work orders. David said the system must have glitched. Mark did not reply. He thanked everyone for their time. He said the audit was ongoing. He reminded them of the NDA. The meeting ended. Sarah returned to her floor. David remained behind. An hour later, an email from HR arrived. It announced a temporary restructuring of the operations department. David Ross would be focusing on special strategic projects. Day-to-day operations would be managed by his direct reports. The email wished him well in his new focus. It was a clear demotion. David's office door remained closed. The following week, Sarah received a new assignment. It came from the CFO's office directly. She was to conduct a full inventory reconciliation for all West Coast facilities. She was given a team of 2 junior analysts. She was to report her findings weekly to the internal audit team. She was not to report to David. This was a significant piece of visibility. She assembled her team. She built a rigorous verification protocol. They would match system records to physical assets. They would also verify property documentation for each site. The work was tedious. It took weeks. David was invisible during this time. His calendar showed no meetings. His email output dropped to 0. One Friday, Sarah's team discovered another discrepancy. It was at a smaller storage facility in California. The system listed the land as owned. The county records showed a lease with a similar structure to Portland's. This lease had another expired purchase option. She documented it dispassionately. She included it in her weekly audit report. She made no special emphasis. The audit committee took note. They engaged an external law firm. The firm began a title search for all company properties. This was a massive, expensive undertaking. The news trickled down quietly. The board was now involved. The CFO's demeanor grew colder. Pressure was building in the executive suite. David's special projects seemed to produce no output. Sarah continued her work. Her team finished the West Coast inventory. The final report was 300 pages of dry data. It listed every asset, every serial number, every document reference. It highlighted 13 properties with documentation issues. It did not assign blame. It simply stated facts. She submitted the report. The following day, she was summoned to the CFO's office. He was alone. He offered her a seat. He thanked her for her thorough work. He said the company was in a difficult position. The external law firm's preliminary findings were troubling. Several assets were misclassified. The fixes would be complex. They might require financial restatements. He then asked her a direct question. He asked if David Ross had ever directed her to falsify records. She said no. He asked if he had pressured her to omit data. She repeated her statement from the audit meeting. She said he directed her to use available data and deemed some information irrelevant. The CFO nodded slowly. He said the board was considering its options. He told her to keep her team engaged. There would be more verification work for other regions. He ended the meeting. As she left, she saw David waiting in the outer area. He was looking at his phone. He did not glance up as she passed. The next Monday, an official announcement came. The company would delay its quarterly earnings release. It cited the need for additional time to complete a routine asset review. The market reacted poorly. The stock dropped 7%. Analysts asked pointed questions on the investor call. The CEO gave vague answers about operational excellence reviews. Inside the company, rumors swirled. David Ross was placed on administrative leave. The email from HR cited company policy regarding pending internal reviews. His access was revoked immediately. Sarah was asked to take over his active project files. She logged into his project management portal. It was mostly empty. His strategic projects were placeholders with no content. She found one folder with meeting notes. They were about potential consulting opportunities with other firms. The dates were recent. She reported this to internal audit. They requested a copy of the folder. She provided it. A week later, the external auditors arrived. They were from a major accounting firm. They set up in a conference room. They requested vast amounts of data. The finance department was in a state of quiet panic. Sarah's inventory report became a key document for them. They interviewed her. They were polite and precise. They focused on her methodology. They seemed satisfied. Meanwhile, the law firm's title search concluded. The report was delivered to the board's audit committee. Its contents were confidential, but the consequences were not. The CFO and the general counsel resigned within a day of each other. The press release said they were pursuing other opportunities. The CEO took over as interim CFO. The atmosphere was tense. Sarah maintained her routine. She came in, worked, left. Her team was expanded. She was now managing 5 people. She received a formal title change. She was now Director of Asset Integrity. The promotion came via email from the CEO's office. There was no ceremony. David Ross remained on leave. His status was a mystery. Then, a subpoena arrived at the company. It was from the Securities and Exchange Commission. It was a request for documents related to asset valuation and management's representations. The legal department scrambled. The board hired a crisis communications firm. Sarah was interviewed by the company's outside legal counsel. They prepped her for a possible SEC deposition. They told her to stick to the facts. They told her to only answer the question asked. She listened. She agreed. The corporate gossip was now uncontrollable. People linked the SEC subpoena to David's leave. They wondered who was next. Through it all, Sarah worked. Her new director role gave her access to budget meetings. She saw the financial impact of the restatements. Reserves had to be taken. Credit lines were reviewed. It was a slow, grinding procedural nightmare. One afternoon, she received a calendar invite from the CEO's executive assistant. It was for a one-on-one meeting. The subject was business continuity planning. She accepted. The meeting was short. The CEO was a man she had seen only in videos. He looked tired. He said her work had been critical during a challenging time. He said the company was stabilizing. He asked if she had any concerns about her department. She said she needed a dedicated legal point of contact for property reviews. He agreed immediately. He then asked an unexpected question. He asked if she was aware of any other systematic issues. He was not asking about assets. He was asking about people. She understood. She said her work had been focused on physical and legal documentation. She had no insight into personnel matters. He seemed to accept that. He thanked her and ended the meeting. That evening, she checked the news. A short article appeared on a financial website. It reported that the SEC inquiry was widening. It mentioned the company by name. It also mentioned that former executives might be under scrutiny. No names were given. The next week, David Ross's administrative leave was converted into a permanent separation. The announcement was a single line in the internal HR update. It said his departure was effective immediately. The company wished him well in his future endeavors. There was no party, no farewell email. His profile disappeared from the company directory. His office was emptied over a weekend. On Monday, a new VP of operations was announced. She was an external hire from a competitor. Her first all-hands meeting was about transparency and rigorous controls. She cited Sarah's asset verification project as a model of good practice. Sarah attended the meeting. She listened. She felt no triumph. It was simply a new organizational fact. Her work continued to expand. She was now reviewing global asset records. The process was slow but steady. She built a small, capable team. They developed new protocols. They implemented a digital document management system for property records. The company's quarterly earnings were finally released. They included a significant one-time charge for asset impairment. The CEO held a difficult investor call. He promised better governance. The stock price remained depressed. Months passed. The SEC inquiry remained open but quiet. The company moved forward. Sarah's life became a rhythm of audits and verifications. She rarely thought of David Ross, but one day, a notification popped up on her screen. It was a LinkedIn update. It suggested she might know David Ross. She clicked. His profile showed he was now a strategic operations consultant. His profile summary was boastful. It highlighted his success in driving efficiencies and cost savings at his previous company. It did not name the company. He had fewer than 50 connections. She closed the tab. It was irrelevant to her. Her focus was on a new problem. The external auditors had found a discrepancy in depreciation schedules. It was tied to the software used for the fixed asset ledger. The error was systemic. It went back 5 years. It would require another adjustment. She notified her team. They began the painstaking review. It was another legal, boring, procedural problem. It would take months to correct. She scheduled a kickoff meeting with finance and it. She drafted an email outlining the scope. She was about to hit send when a new email arrived. It was from the General Counsel's office. The new General Counsel had been in place for 3 months. The email was addressed to her and the CEO. It contained a PDF attachment. The subject line was SEC Settlement Preliminary Findings. She opened it. It was a draft of a proposed settlement order. The SEC had concluded its investigation. The company would pay a civil penalty. It would not admit or deny the findings. The order included findings of fact. Sarah scanned the document. It described failures in internal controls over financial reporting. It described how certain leases were incorrectly accounted for as owned assets. It stated that senior management was provided with information contradicting the owned asset classification. It stated that this information was not disclosed to the auditors. The findings did not name individual executives, but the description pointed to a period of time. That period coincided with David Ross's tenure and the previous CFO's tenure. The document was dry. It was filled with legal and accounting terminology. It was the culmination of a long process. She finished reading. She replied to the General Counsel and the CEO. She asked if her team's current work on depreciation was in scope for the settlement. The General Counsel replied an hour later. He said no. The settlement was specific to the lease classification issue. Her current work was a separate remediation effort. She acknowledged his email. She returned to her draft about the depreciation project. She sent it. Her calendar updated with a series of meetings. Life at the company moved on under a cloud of compliance. The settlement would be a public black eye, but it would allow the company to close the chapter. For Sarah, it was just another document to file. She organized it in the appropriate digital folder. She applied the correct taxonomy tags. She thought nothing more of it, but the pressure was not over. The board had one final card to play. They had to demonstrate accountability to shareholders. The settlement, while not nomming individuals, left a glaring question unanswered. Who would be held responsible? The departed CFO and General Counsel were gone. David Ross was gone. But the board needed a public signal. They needed to show they had addressed the failure of oversight. The answer came in a terse press release a week later. The company announced the immediate retirement of its long-serving chief executive officer. The move was framed as a planned succession. A new CEO was named. He was an outsider known for operational rigor. The market reacted with cautious optimism. The stock rose 2%. Inside, employees were stunned. The CEO had been a fixture for 15 years. His departure felt sudden. There was no goodbye speech. His office was cleared over a weekend. Sarah read the press release at her desk. She felt a cold understanding. The board had cut the head off the snake. It was the ultimate procedural move. It was not about guilt or innocence. It was about restoring stability. It was a corporate reset. Her phone buzzed. It was the new CEO's assistant. He wanted to meet with her in 30 minutes. She said she would be there. She reviewed her current project status. She prepared no presentation. She simply gathered her facts. The new CEO's office was different. The furniture had been replaced. It was more modern and austere. The CEO was a man in his late 40s. He stood up and shook her hand. He had read her asset integrity reports. He said they were exemplary. He said her department would be central to his turnaround plan. He asked her what she needed to ensure no more surprises. She listed 3 things: a direct reporting line to the audit committee for whistleblower reports, a dedicated forensic accounting resource, and a mandate to review all third-party contracts above a certain value. He agreed to all 3 on the spot. He told her to draft the proposals for the next board meeting. He said he would sponsor them. The meeting lasted 10 minutes. She left with more authority than she had ever held. It was not a reward. It was a burden. She was now the person responsible for preventing the next disaster. The weight was immense and silent. She walked back to her department. Her team was waiting for an update on the depreciation project. She gave it to them. She assigned tasks. She did not mention her meeting with the new CEO. That evening, she worked late. The office was quiet. As she was packing up, her screen flashed. It was an automated alert from the new document management system she had implemented. The system had flagged a contract. It was a vendor agreement for facility maintenance. The flag was for an automatic renewal clause. The clause had a 60-day notice window to cancel. The window expired tomorrow. The vendor was the same one used for the Portland warehouse. The contract was for 5 years at a steep premium. It had been signed by David Ross 11 months ago. She stared at the alert. Letting it auto-renew would commit the company to another 5 years of high costs. Terminating it would require a formal notice tonight. She had the authority, but it would create immediate operational friction. The vendor would complain. Facilities management would be scrambling. It was a small, sharp decision, a test of her new mandate. She picked up the phone. She called the head of facilities at home. She explained the situation. He was annoyed but understood. She drafted the termination notice. She cited the clause number. She sent it to the vendor via certified email. She copied legal. She then logged the action in the system. The alert turned from red to green. It was done. She shut down her computer. The office was dark. As she rode the elevator down, she considered the chain of events. It had started with a rejected expense report. It had led to a CEO's retirement. It was now leading to her canceling a vendor contract in the middle of the night. The mechanism was always the same: a document, a clause, a procedure followed without emotion. The elevator doors opened. The lobby was empty. She walked out into the cool night air. Her phone vibrated. It was an email notification. The vendor had already replied. They were protesting the termination. They claimed they never received proper notice of the clause. They threatened to involve their legal team. They copied David Ross's personal email address on the message. Sarah read the vendor's email on her phone. The inclusion of David's personal address was a deliberate provocation. She did not reply. She forwarded the entire thread to the new general counsel. She added a single line. She noted that the vendor was copied on David Ross's termination notice. She then went home. The next morning, the general counsel had already acted. He sent a formal response to the vendor. He attached the signed contract with the renewal clause highlighted. He attached the proof of delivery for the termination notice. He stated that the matter was closed. He did not acknowledge David's inclusion. The vendor went silent. Sarah's action was noted by the new CEO. He sent a brief, approving email. It read, "Good catch." This small exchange solidified her standing. Her proposals for enhanced authority were presented to the board. They were approved without debate. Her title changed again. She was now Vice President of Operational Integrity. Her department grew. She hired a forensic accountant. His name was Arjun. He was quiet and methodical. His first task was to analyze all contracts signed by David Ross. The scope was broad. It included vendor agreements, service contracts, and non-disclosure pacts. Arjun worked silently in a corner office. He produced weekly summaries. They were dense with data. Most contracts were standard, but a pattern emerged in the real estate and logistics vendors. Several had unusual payment terms. They included upfront bonuses labeled as implementation fees. These fees were large. They were paid to vendors with limited operating histories. Sarah reviewed the summaries. She asked Arjun to trace the payments. He needed access to the accounts payable system. She authorized it. His work now intersected with the finance department. This caused subtle friction. The new CFO was cooperative but wary. He did not like an operational VP digging into payment histories. Sarah scheduled a meeting with the CFO. She framed it as an alignment discussion. She presented the pattern as a potential control weakness. She said her goal was to tighten procurement processes. The CFO relaxed. He agreed to give Arjun read-only access to the payment ledgers. The trace began. Weeks turned into a detailed financial map. Arjun found that 3 vendors had received substantial upfront fees. The services rendered after the fees were minimal. The contracts were never properly fulfilled, yet no one had pursued remedies. The project codes used for these payments were all under David Ross's old budget. The audit trail showed his electronic approval on every invoice. Sarah compiled Arjun's findings into a neutral report. She did not draw conclusions. She simply presented the data points. She submitted the report to internal audit and the general counsel. This triggered a mandatory review under the company's fraud policy. The audit committee was notified. An external forensic firm was engaged. Their investigation was confidential. Sarah was interviewed again. She provided all of Arjun's work papers. The atmosphere in the company grew tense again. People began to connect the dots. The SEC settlement was now public. The former CEO was gone. The new CEO was demanding transparency. And now a forensic firm was in the building. Rumors suggested something criminal had occurred. The new CEO held a town hall. He said the company was committed to rooting out past misconduct. He asked for patience. He did not take questions. During this time, Sarah received a letter. It was from a law firm. The firm represented David Ross. The letter was addressed to her personally at her office. It alleged that she had engaged in a campaign of defamation against Mr. Ross. It claimed her reports contained false and misleading statements. It demanded she cease all communication about him immediately. It threatened legal action if she did not comply. The letter was a standard intimidation tactic. She did not react emotionally. She forwarded it to the general counsel. He responded within an hour. He told her not to reply. He said the company would handle it. She filed the letter away. She continued her work. The forensic investigation concluded 2 months later. Its findings were presented directly to the audit committee. The committee made a decision. They referred the matter to the federal authorities. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the district opened an investigation. This was a different level of severity. The SEC dealt in civil penalties. The U.S. Attorney dealt in criminal charges. A grand jury was convened. Subpoenas were issued for documents and testimony. The company fully cooperated. Sarah was notified she would likely be called to testify before the grand jury. The company's outside criminal defense lawyers prepped her. They were sharp and focused. They drilled her on answering only the question asked. They told her to be precise and unemotional. She practiced with them for 3 sessions. She was a perfect witness. She offered no narrative, only facts. The day of her testimony arrived. She entered the federal courthouse through a side entrance. The grand jury proceedings were secret. She was sworn in. The prosecutor was a young woman with a calm demeanor. She asked Sarah about her role. She asked about the asset verification project. She asked about the discovery of the lease documents. She asked about the vendor contracts Arjun had analyzed. Sarah answered each question factually. She did not volunteer information. The prosecutor showed her copies of the vendor invoices. She confirmed the electronic approval signatures belonged to David Ross's system login. The prosecutor asked if Sarah had any knowledge of services rendered for those payments. Sarah said she had only reviewed the contracts and payment records. She had no first-hand knowledge of service delivery. The session lasted 2 hours. She was dismissed. She returned to work. Life moved on under the shadow of the grand jury. The company's stock price was volatile. The new CEO initiated a major rebranding campaign. It was about trust and reliability. Sarah's department was featured in the internal materials. They were held up as the new standard of vigilance. It was an uncomfortable spotlight. She avoided interviews. She let her team leads handle the publicity. She focused on building a permanent monitoring system. She implemented automated checks for contract clauses. She set up alerts for unusual payment patterns. Her work was becoming institutionalized. It was boring, technical, and effective. Months passed. Then the news broke. The U.S. Attorney's Office announced an indictment. David Ross was charged with wire fraud and conspiracy to commit securities fraud. The press release was detailed. It alleged he had orchestrated a scheme to overstate company assets. It alleged he had entered into sham vendor contracts for kickbacks. The named co-conspirators were the owners of the 3 vendor companies. They were also charged. The company was referred to as Victim Company A. The news was everywhere. Industry publications picked it up. The story had all the elements: corporate intrigue, missing money, a fallen executive. David's photograph was on financial news sites. He looked older. Sarah saw the headline on her news feed. She read the article once. She felt nothing. It was a procedural outcome, a legal process reaching its next phase. The company issued a statement. It expressed disappointment in the former employee's actions. It reaffirmed its commitment to ethics. The statement was vetted by a dozen lawyers. It was perfectly bland. That afternoon, the new CEO called Sarah into his office. He asked her to close the door. He said the indictment was a difficult moment. He said the board was grateful for her work. He said they wanted to show that appreciation. He offered her a significant equity grant. It was vested over 4 years. It was a substantial amount of money. She thanked him. She said she was just doing her job. He nodded. He said the job was now expanding. With the criminal case proceeding, the company would have to cooperate fully. She would be a point of contact for the prosecutors. She would need to manage document productions and witness coordination. It was a heavy administrative burden. She accepted. It was part of the responsibility she now carried. She left his office. The equity grant paperwork arrived via encrypted email later that day. She signed it electronically. She did not calculate its potential value. It was just another document. The criminal case moved slowly. David pleaded not guilty. His defense was aggressive. They filed motions to dismiss. They argued the company was scapegoating him for its own accounting failures. The legal back and forth filled docket entries. Sarah's team responded to dozens of document requests from both the prosecution and the defense. They spent weeks in a secure room with FBI forensic accountants. The agents were polite and thorough. They asked clarifying questions about business processes. Sarah's team provided flowcharts and system diagrams. It was deeply unglamorous work. During this period, Sarah received another letter. This one was not from a lawyer. It was a handwritten note on plain paper. It was delivered to her home mailbox. It contained only one sentence. "You think you've won, you haven't." The handwriting was unfamiliar. She showed it to the general counsel. He advised her to report it to the FBI agents on the case. She did. They took the note seriously. They placed it in an evidence bag. They asked if she felt threatened. She said she did not feel physically threatened. They asked about her personal security habits. She was already cautious. The incident was logged. Nothing came of it immediately, but it was a reminder that the human element still existed beneath the paperwork. The pressure was now personal but still indirect. She installed a security camera at her front door. She did not change her routine. The legal proceedings crept forward. A trial date was set, then delayed. The defense requested more time to review documents. The company's legal costs mounted. The quarterly reports listed a line item for investigation and remediation expenses. It was in the millions. Shareholders grumbled but stayed patient. The new CEO's turnaround narrative was holding. Operations were improving. Profits were slowly recovering. Sarah's integrity protocols were credited with reducing costs. She became a known entity in the industry. She received a few discreet calls from recruiters. She listened politely. She did not engage. She was committed to seeing the process through. Her team was loyal and highly competent. They operated like a small, independent audit firm within the company. They were feared and respected. One afternoon, Arjun, the forensic accountant, came to her office. He closed the door. He had finished a deep analysis of one particular vendor. The owner had a prior business relationship with David Ross at a previous company. That company had also suffered unexplained losses in a logistics division. The pattern was not conclusive, but it was suggestive. Arjun had compiled a timeline of their professional overlap. Sarah reviewed it. She told Arjun to provide everything to the prosecution. He had already done so. He was just keeping her informed. She thanked him. After he left, she sat in silence. The web was wider than she had known. David's actions were not an isolated lapse. They were possibly a repeated pattern. This information would be devastating at trial. It spoke to intent. It would help the prosecution prove he knew what he was doing. She did not dwell on it. She moved to the next task. The company was negotiating a new credit agreement with its banks. The banks demanded representations about the state of internal controls. Sarah's department had to certify a dozen different assertions. She worked with the internal audit head to draft the language. It was precise and airtight. The banks accepted it. The credit line was renewed at favorable rates. This was a major win for the new CEO. He sent a congratulatory email to the finance team. Sarah was copied. Her role was acknowledged. She was now part of the machinery that kept the company solvent. It was a powerful, invisible form of influence. She never attended the high-level banking meetings, but her work made them possible. The trial date was finally fixed. It was 6 months away. The prosecution contacted Sarah. They wanted to meet for a pre-trial witness preparation. She agreed. The meeting was held at the U.S. Attorney's office. The lead prosecutor and 2 assistants were there. They walked her through the likely questioning. They showed her the exhibits they planned to use. Many were her own reports and emails. They asked her to explain them in simple terms for the jury. She practiced. She was clear and concise. The prosecutors were pleased. They said her demeanor was perfect. She was a factual witness, not a partisan one. She left the meeting. As she rode the elevator down, she felt the weight of the coming public spectacle. She would be on the stand. Her name would be in the press. She would be cross-examined by David's defense attorney. That attorney had a reputation for being brutal. She was not afraid of the questions. She was afraid of the exposure. She preferred the shadows of data and documents. The sunlight of a courtroom was harsh. She discussed this with the company's lawyer. He assured her the company would provide full support. They would have a public relations strategy. They would portray her as a dedicated professional uncovering truth. She did not want a portrayal. She wanted to be left alone, but that was no longer an option. She was a key part of the narrative. The company needed her to be the face of its remediation. It was a strategic necessity. She accepted this. It was another procedural requirement. She began to prepare mentally. She read transcripts from similar trials. She studied how expert witnesses were questioned. She honed her ability to stay calm under pressure. She even did mock cross-examinations with a lawyer hired by the company. He played the part of the aggressive defense attorney. He tried to rattle her. He accused her of ambition. He suggested she fabricated evidence to advance her career. She never lost her composure. She simply pointed to the documented facts. She stated she had no control over the evidence. She only reported what she found. The lawyer was impressed. He said she was ready. The weeks counted down. The media coverage intensified. David Ross gave an interview to a financial news network. He professed his innocence. He said he was a fall guy for systemic failures. He did not mention Sarah by name, but he referred to overzealous mid-level employees rewriting history. She watched the interview once. His performance was convincing. He looked directly into the camera. He sounded wronged. She turned it off. The battle was now in the court of public opinion as well as the court of law. The company's PR team drafted talking points for executives. Sarah was instructed not to give any interviews. She complied. The trial began on a rainy Monday. The courtroom was full. Sarah attended the opening statements. The prosecution laid out a methodical case of fraud. The defense painted David as a hard-nosed executive being second-guessed after the fact. The tone was set. Sarah was scheduled to testify on the third day. She sat in a witness waiting room. It was small and plain. A federal marshal brought her water. She reviewed her notes. She was called after the lunch recess. She walked to the stand. She was sworn in. The prosecutor began with gentle questions. She established Sarah's role and her discovery of the lease documents. Sarah's voice was clear and even. She used simple language. The prosecutor then moved to the vendor contracts. She displayed the invoices with David's electronic signature. She asked Sarah to confirm they were paid. Sarah confirmed. The prosecutor asked if the services were delivered. Sarah said her review found no evidence of full delivery. The defense objected. The judge overruled. The prosecutor moved on. Her direct examination was smooth and efficient. Then came the cross-examination. David's defense attorney was a tall man with a commanding voice. He approached the stand. He smiled at her. It was not a friendly smile. He began by questioning her qualifications. He asked if she had a CPA license. She said no. He asked if she had a law degree. She said no. He asked if she had any formal training in forensic accounting. She said she had on-the-job training and supervised certified professionals. He subtly implied she was out of her depth. He then moved to her expense report, the one David had rejected. He suggested she held a grudge. She said she did not. He presented the email where she questioned the rejection. She acknowledged sending it. He asked if she was angry about the money. She said she was following company policy to seek clarification. He then shifted to her promotion timeline. He displayed organizational charts. He showed her rapid rise after David was placed on leave. He implied her advancement was a reward for helping to remove him. She stated her promotions were based on business need and expanded responsibility. Her tone never changed. It remained flat and factual. The attorney grew more aggressive. He asked about her communication with the SEC. She said she cooperated with investigations as required. He asked if she initiated contact. She said she had used the company's whistleblower channel as per policy. He pounced on the word whistleblower. He asked if she considered herself a whistleblower. She said the policy defined the process, not her personal designation. The judge sustained an objection from the prosecution. The line of questioning was stopped. The defense attorney returned to his table. He looked frustrated. Sarah had not given him anything. Her answers were neutral and procedural. He had failed to paint her as vindictive. He concluded his cross-examination. She was excused. She stepped down from the stand. She did not look at David as she walked past. She left the courtroom. The company's public relations head met her outside. He said she did excellent. He said her calmness was perfect for the cameras. She had not realized cameras were allowed. She felt a wave of cold detachment. She was now a public figure in a small, ugly drama. She returned to work the next day. The trial continued without her. She followed the news reports. The prosecution presented its forensic evidence. The FBI accountants explained the money trail. The vendor owners testified under immunity. Their testimony was damning. They described kickback arrangements in careful detail. David's defense called its own experts. They argued the accounting was complex and subjective. They argued David relied on his finance team. The case was going to the jury. Deliberations lasted 4 days. The tension was palpable company-wide. Employees watched news feeds. On the afternoon of the 4th day, a news alert flashed. The jury had reached a verdict. Sarah was in a budget meeting. She saw the alert on her phone. She excused herself. She went to her office and closed the door. She turned on the live stream from the courthouse. The jury filed in. They looked tired. The foreperson handed the verdict form to the clerk. The clerk read the charges one by one. For each count of wire fraud, guilty. For conspiracy to commit securities fraud, guilty. The reading took several minutes. David Ross stood motionless. His wife wept quietly in the front row. He was remanded into custody pending sentencing. The judge revoked his bail. He was led away in handcuffs. The screen cut to commentators analyzing the verdict. Sarah turned it off. The process was complete. The legal mechanism had worked. She felt no satisfaction, only a profound emptiness. The phone on her desk rang. It was the new CEO. He asked her to come to his office. She composed herself and went. He was not alone. The chairman of the board was there. They thanked her for her steadfastness. They said the company had weathered a storm. They said her role was invaluable. They were sincere. But their eyes held a different message. The chapter was closed. The person responsible was convicted. The company could now truly move on. Her value as the person who unearthed the problem was now at its peak, but also perhaps at its end. They did not say this. They spoke of future initiatives. They asked for her thoughts on expanding her department globally. She gave measured answers. The meeting ended. She returned to her desk. An email from HR was waiting. It was about updating her emergency contact information. It was a routine administrative task. She filled out the form. She hit submit. She looked out her window. The city moved below, indifferent. She had followed the rules. She had used documents and procedures. She had never raised her voice. She had never sought revenge. Yet revenge had been exacted through the cold, grinding wheels of law and corporate policy. David Ross was going to prison. His career was destroyed. His family was shattered. It was a total, unspoken annihilation. And she had been the catalyst, not through anger but through attention to detail. The power source had been a clause in a lease, a line in a contract, a policy number. It was all so boring, so legal, so devastating. Her phone buzzed again. It was Arjun. He had found another anomaly, this time in the European subsidiary's procurement data. He needed her approval to launch a preliminary review. She read his summary. It was a pattern of duplicate payments to a logistics vendor in Poland. The amounts were small. The control weakness was apparent. She wrote back a one-line authorization. Proceed with preliminary review per protocol. She put down her phone. The work never stopped. There was always another document, another clause, another quiet contradiction waiting to be found. She gathered her things to leave for the day. As she walked through the quiet office, she passed the empty space where David Ross's office had been. It was now a small conference room. A team was using it for a brainstorming session. They were laughing about something. They did not notice her pass. She took the elevator down to the garage. She got into her car. She drove home through the evening traffic. The radio news mentioned the conviction briefly. It was a footnote in the business report. She changed the station. She found a music channel. She listened to orchestral music for the rest of the drive. When she arrived home, she checked her security camera feed. There was no activity. Everything was normal. She went inside. She prepared a simple dinner. She ate alone. She thought about the European duplicate payments. She wondered if it was just an error or something more. She would know after Arjun's review. It was just another problem to solve, another process to follow. There was no grand finale, no celebration, just the certainty that tomorrow would bring more data, more reports, more silent procedural scrutiny. The system she built was now permanent. It would outlast her. It would catch the next David Ross and the one after that. It was a machine for extracting truth through boredom, and she was its chief operator. She felt neither pride nor regret. She felt only the cold clarity of a function performed correctly. She finished her meal. She washed the plate. She went to her home office. She opened her laptop. There was one last email from the general counsel. It contained a final, sealed copy of the court's judgment for the company's records. She saved it to the correct server folder. She logged off. She sat in the dark for a long time. The only sound was the hum of her computer cooling down. In the silence, she understood the true nature of her victory. It was not a victory at all. It was merely the correct execution of a duty. The humiliation had been avenged not by her, but by the rules themselves. David Ross had not been defeated by Sarah Chen. He had been erased by the very system he thought he controlled, and she was just another part of that system, a cog that turned when presented with a document. She closed her laptop. The screen went black. Tomorrow would be another day of quiet, relentless audit. The Polish duplicate payments investigation was routine. Arjun's preliminary review took 2 weeks. He found a simple coding error in the European subsidiary's accounts payable software. It was not fraud. It was a glitch. Sarah authorized the correction. A journal entry was made. The matter was closed with a memo to it. Life settled into a new rhythm after the trial. The company's public reputation was slowly healing. The new CEO gave interviews about cultural transformation. He never mentioned Sarah by name. He spoke of robust controls and embedded integrity. She preferred the anonymity. Her department's budget was increased by 15%. She hired more analysts. She implemented a continuous monitoring dashboard for the board's audit committee. The dashboard updated nightly. It showed metrics on contract compliance, payment anomalies, and document verification rates. It was green most of the time. The board loved it. It was a tangible sign of safety. Sarah presented the dashboard to them quarterly. Her presentations were 5 slides long. She spoke for 10 minutes. She answered questions politely. She left as soon as she was dismissed. She became a ghost in the executive suite, powerful but invisible. Her influence was in the data she curated. One morning, a calendar invite appeared from the chairman of the audit committee. It was a one-on-one lunch. This was unusual. The chairman was a former federal judge. He was stern and respected. She accepted the invitation. The lunch was at a quiet club downtown. He was already seated when she arrived. They exchanged pleasantries. He ordered a salad. She did the same. He got straight to the point. He said the board was considering her for the role of chief compliance officer. It was a new C-level position they were creating. It would report directly to the board. It would have veto power over certain contracts and hires. It was a position of significant power. He asked if she was interested. She said she would need to understand the mandate. He laid out the vision. The CCO would be the ultimate internal authority on ethics and controls. It would be a check on the CEO himself. The board wanted independence. They wanted someone who was not politically aligned. They wanted her. She listened. She asked about the reporting structure and budget autonomy. He gave satisfactory answers. She said she would consider it. He nodded. He said there was no rush. The formal offer would come in a few weeks. The lunch ended. She returned to the office. She did not mention the conversation to anyone. She knew the offer was not just a promotion. It was a strategic move by the board. They wanted to institutionalize her function. They also wanted to bind her more tightly to them. It was a form of corporate containment. She understood this. She began to draft what her conditions would be. They were not about salary. They were about authority. She wanted the ability to commission external audits without CEO approval. She wanted a direct line to the external auditors. She wanted a clause in her contract guaranteeing her role could not be restructured without board supermajority approval. She worked on the list for a week. It was a contract like any other. She would negotiate its terms. While she was drafting, another legal process was unfolding. David Ross's sentencing hearing was scheduled. The probation department prepared a pre-sentencing report. It included victim impact statements. The company was asked to submit one. The task fell to the general counsel. He wrote a dry statement about financial harm and reputational damage. He showed it to Sarah for comment. She had none. He filed it. The sentencing date arrived. Sarah did not attend. She read the news report later. David was sentenced to 78 months in federal prison. He was also ordered to pay restitution. The amount was several $1,000,000. He would likely never pay it. The article included a quote from him. He expressed remorse. He said he had failed his family and colleagues. He did not mention the company by name. The story was a final footnote. That afternoon, Sarah received a notification from the Professional Licensing Board. She was certified in internal auditing. She had quietly completed the requirements during the trial. The certification was now active. It was another credential, another line on her professional profile. It meant nothing to her, but it would matter to the board. She updated her internal HR profile. The next week, the formal offer for the Chief Compliance Officer role arrived. It was a 20-page employment agreement. She reviewed it with a personal lawyer she had hired. The lawyer was expensive and specialized in executive contracts. They went through the document line by line. The company had included strong non-disclosure and non-disparagement clauses. They had also included a broad arbitration agreement. Sarah's lawyer advised pushing back on arbitration. He said she should keep the right to go to court for certain matters. She agreed. They drafted a markup of the agreement. They sent it back to the board's special committee. The negotiation took 3 weeks. It was conducted entirely through lawyers. Sarah never spoke to the chairman again during this time. It was purely procedural. In the end, she got most of what she wanted. The arbitration clause was narrowed. Her authority to initiate audits was affirmed. Her reporting line was solidly to the audit committee. The compensation package was substantial. She signed the agreement on a Tuesday. The announcement was made the following Monday. It was a press release. It highlighted her credentials and her role in building the integrity function. Industry analysts praised the move. They said it showed the company was serious about governance. Her photograph was included in the release. It was a standard corporate headshot. She looked neutral and professional. Her old role of VP of Operational Integrity was filled by Arjun. He was promoted. He thanked her quietly. She transitioned her responsibilities to him over a month. Her new office was on a different floor. It was larger. It had a view. She kept it sparse. She brought only her computer and a few files. Her first act as CCO was to issue a policy memorandum. It standardized the whistleblower intake process across all global subsidiaries. The memo was 3 pages. It was sent to every managing director. Compliance was now mandatory. A month into her new role, she received an email from the CEO's executive assistant. The CEO wanted to discuss the compliance budget for the next fiscal year. She scheduled the meeting. The CEO was polite but distant. He viewed her as a board implant. He was not wrong. They discussed numbers. He questioned the need for a 10% increase in her department's headcount. She presented the risk-based justification. She showed data on regulatory fines in their industry. He conceded. The meeting was formal and cold. It was clear a boundary had been drawn. She was no longer part of the operational team. She was oversight. This isolation was by design. She accepted it. Her team began to grow. She hired a former federal prosecutor as her deputy. His name was Michael. He understood investigations. He took over the day-to-day management of the monitoring dashboard. Sarah focused on board relations. She prepared deep-dive reports on specific risk areas. One report was on cybersecurity and its overlap with financial fraud. The board found it insightful. Time passed. The company's stock price gradually recovered. The story of the scandal faded from memory. New challenges emerged. A supply chain disruption. A competitor's product launch. The daily business of business moved on. Sarah's life became a cycle of board meetings, risk assessments, and policy reviews. It was intellectually demanding but emotionally sterile. She was a guardian of process. One afternoon, Michael came into her office. He closed the door. He had been reviewing archived compliance reports from the period before David Ross. He found something curious. It was a memo from the former head of internal audit. It was addressed to the former CEO and the former CFO. The subject was control deficiencies in logistics procurement. The date was 2 years before David was hired. The memo outlined concerns about vendor selection processes. It mentioned a specific vendor name. That vendor later became one of the 3 used by David for the sham contracts. Michael showed Sarah the memo. The former audit head had recommended a full review. A handwritten note on the copy, likely from the former CEO, read, noted, discuss with ops. There was no evidence of any discussion. Sarah read the memo carefully. It was a historical artifact. It proved the control weakness existed before David arrived. He had simply exploited a pre-existing flaw. This changed nothing about his guilt, but it implicated the old guard in negligence. It was a document the board would not want to see. It undermined the narrative that the problem was one rogue executive. It suggested systemic failure at the highest level. She asked Michael where he found it. He said it was in a digital archive that was scheduled for deletion. The data retention policy was 7 years. The archive was due to be purged next month. He had been running a final review. She told him to make a certified copy, to preserve it with a digital fingerprint. He did so. She then instructed him to leave the original archive untouched. She did not report the memo to the board. Not yet. It was information, a piece of context. She filed it away in her personal secure files. It was insurance. The board trusted her now, but trust was conditional. She knew her position existed at their pleasure. The memo was a small piece of leverage. She hoped never to use it, but its existence was calming. Weeks turned into months. The company faced a shareholder lawsuit. It was a class action related to the stock drop during the scandal. The lawsuit named the former CEO, the former CFO, and the board members from that period. It did not name the company as it stood now. The legal defense was handled by outside counsel. Sarah was asked to provide documents for discovery. She cooperated fully. She provided everything that was requested. The memo from the former audit head was not requested. It was not relevant to the specific claims in the lawsuit, so it remained hidden. The lawsuit dragged on. It was settled for a modest sum a year later. The company's insurers paid most of it. The final release of claims was another document Sarah reviewed. She ensured the language did not impede her department's future work. It was clear. The past was now legally buried. Her life became very quiet. She worked. She went home. She had no personal life to speak of. Her identity was her function. One day, she received a letter from the Federal Bureau of Prisons. It was a notification. David Ross had applied for a transfer to a minimum security camp. The notification was routine for certain corporate crimes. As a named victim, the company had the right to comment. The letter was addressed to the legal department. It had been forwarded to her as CCO. She read it. She had no comment. She forwarded it back to legal with a note, "No objection from compliance." She felt nothing. He was a data point in a correctional system. His fate was sealed by his own actions, validated by a court. Her role in that sequence was complete. She deleted the email. Her focus shifted to the future. The company was exploring a major acquisition. A competitor in Europe was struggling. The CEO was excited. It was a chance to grow market share dramatically. The due diligence team was assembled. Sarah inserted her department into the process. They would review the target's compliance history. They would look for hidden liabilities. The due diligence was intense. Thousands of documents were reviewed. Sarah's team found several issues: environmental violations at a plant, questionable tax practices in a subsidiary. She reported these findings to the acquisition committee. The committee debated. The CEO argued the issues were fixable. The board was cautious. They asked Sarah for her recommendation. She did not give a yes or no. She provided a cost estimate for remediation. It was a large number. The board subtracted that number from the acquisition price. The deal became less attractive. The CEO was frustrated. He argued with the board in a private session. Sarah was not present. She heard about it later from the chairman. The board held firm. They reduced their offer by the remediation cost. The target company rejected the lower offer. The deal fell apart. The CEO was furious. He saw Sarah as the reason the deal died. He could not say it publicly. Her analysis was technically flawless, but the relationship was now broken beyond repair. He began to marginalize her in subtle ways. He excluded her from strategic off-sites. He delayed approvals for her team's travel. It was a slow, quiet pushback. Sarah did not react. She did her job. She continued to report to the board. The chairman noticed the tension. He called her. He asked if she was having issues with the CEO. She said the working relationship was professional. She offered no complaints. The chairman was too experienced to believe that. He said the board valued her independence. He said they would support her. It was a vague assurance. She thanked him. The Cold War with the CEO continued for months. Then an opportunity arose for the CEO. He was offered the top job at a larger, more prestigious company. It was a career-defining move. He entered negotiations. The board of their company knew he was looking. They did not stop him. They saw a chance for a clean reset. The CEO accepted the new position. He resigned with a standard 6-month notice period. The board launched a search for his replacement. Sarah was asked to sit on the search committee. Her role was to vet candidates for ethics and compliance histories. She took the task seriously. She ran background checks through her network. One candidate was a star from a well-regarded company. His references were glowing. But Sarah's deputy, Michael, found a discrepancy. The candidate had been named in a wrongful termination lawsuit at his previous firm. The suit was settled confidentially. The allegations were about firing a whistleblower. Sarah dug deeper. She used her contacts at the SEC. She learned the settlement was substantial. The candidate had not disclosed the lawsuit to the search firm. Sarah brought this to the search committee. The other members were annoyed. They liked the candidate. They argued the lawsuit was unproven. Sarah did not argue. She presented the facts. The candidate was asked about it in his next interview. He became defensive. He said it was a frivolous suit. The committee was divided. The chairman made the decision. The candidate was dropped from consideration. The search took 3 more months. They finally selected a candidate from within the industry. She was known for a collaborative but firm style. Her references were clean. Sarah's vetting raised no flags. The new CEO was appointed. Her first meeting with Sarah was cordial. She said she looked forward to working with a strong compliance function. She said she saw it as a business enabler, not a hurdle. It was the right thing to say. Sarah remained cautiously neutral. The transition was smooth. The new CEO brought her own team. She replaced several senior executives. Sarah survived the change. Her role was protected by her contract and board mandate. She became a fixture, a permanent part of the corporate landscape. Years passed. The company thrived under the new leadership. Sarah's department was now 50 people strong. It was a model for other corporations. She gave occasional speeches at industry conferences. She never discussed the David Ross case. She spoke about systems and controls. She was respected but not liked. She was a symbol of necessary bureaucracy. One autumn, she received a package at the office. It was a plain cardboard box. It had no return address. Her assistant brought it in. Sarah opened it carefully. Inside were a few personal items: a cheap pen with a company logo, a stress ball shaped like a globe, a laminated badge from a long-ago industry conference. At the bottom was a folded piece of paper. It was a copy of her original expense report, the one for $147. On the line for approval, someone had stamped the word "paid" in red ink. The stamp was crooked. There was no note. She knew immediately who had sent it. He was out of prison by now. Time served with good behavior. This was his message. A silent, petty gesture. It was meant to unnerve her. She felt nothing. She placed the items back in the box. She called building security. They took the box away. They would log it and dispose of it. She did not report it to the police. It was not a threat. It was a ghost from a past that no longer had power. She went back to her work. That afternoon, she had a meeting with the audit committee. They were discussing the annual compliance report. The report was hundreds of pages. It showed a perfect record. No material findings, no regulatory actions. The dashboard was a sea of green. The chairman smiled. He said her work had brought peace of mind. She accepted the compliment without comment. After the meeting, as she walked back to her office, she passed a young analyst in the hallway. The analyst was arguing with someone on his phone. He was saying the system wouldn't let him submit a report without a pre-approval code. He sounded exactly like she had years ago. She paused for a second. She considered intervening, but she did not. It was not her process. It was the system working as designed. She continued walking. The system was now the protagonist. She was merely its curator. The revenge was complete, and it was perpetual. It lived in every policy, every clause, every required field in a software form. David Ross had tried to beat the system. He had lost. The former CEO had ignored the system. He was gone. The current CEO worked within the system. She was successful. Sarah had become the system. She reached her office. She sat at her desk. The sunset was casting long shadows across the city. Her screen glowed with the nightly dashboard update. All metrics were optimal. She would soon receive an automated email confirming the update's success. She waited for it. It arrived. She read it. She archived it. Another day was done. The quiet, procedural machinery of control hummed on forever.